The balance of power in the Western Hemisphere has just been rewritten. In a bold and calculated move, China has confirmed the delivery of a batch of long-range military surveillance and attack drones to Venezuela. This is not a simple arms sale. It is the materialization of a strategic defense alliance that puts the United States in a checkmate position in its own backyard. The White House is on maximum alert, confronted with the reality that China has established a high-tech air defense bubble over the Caribbean, directly challenging American air supremacy. The turning point was the activation of a long-standing military cooperation agreement, now accelerated in response to rising tensions. China, under the pretext of technical assistance for critical infrastructure security, transferred operational control of a fleet of Wing-Lung 2 drones to the Bolivarian National Armed Forces, FANB. These drones, known for their precision surveillance and attack capabilities, not only reinforce Venezuelan defense but also serve as an eye and a fist for Beijing in the region. Intelligence reports from the U.S. Department of Defense indicate that the drones are already operational. From the El Libertador Air Base near Maracay, the presence of these Chinese assets, capable of monitoring long-range maritime and air traffic, creates an anti-access area denial, A2AD zone, that drastically complicates any U.S. military intervention planning. In response, the U.S. Southern Command, SOUTHCOM, issued a declaration of maximum concern, while the USS Harry S. Truman and its strike group were repositioned to the Atlantic, in a show of force that is now contested by an unmanned aerial threat. What is at stake is the credibility of the Monroe Doctrine and the U.S. capacity to project power without contestation. This script will dissect Beijing's strategic calculation, Caracas' audacity, and the immediate consequences of this new air defense reality in the Caribbean. Pause for thought. If China can establish an air defense zone in the Caribbean, does it mean the era of American hegemony is over? Leave your opinion in the comments now. Your analysis is vital to understanding this new multipolar world. The transfer of Chinese drones to Venezuela is a game-changing move, transforming Venezuela's defense capability from obsolete to a high-tech asymmetric threat. The delivered fleet consists of at least 12 Wing-Lung 2 drones, a medium-altitude long-endurance, MALE, unmanned aerial system, UAS. The Wing-Lung 2 has a maximum takeoff weight of 4,200 kilo, a service ceiling of 9,000 meters, and an endurance of up to 32 hours. This endurance is critical, allowing for continuous surveillance missions over the Caribbean. While not as stealthy or advanced as the U.S. MQ-9 Reaper, the Wing-Lung 2 offers a similar operational profile at a fraction of the cost, making it an ideal tool for asymmetric warfare and A2AD strategy. Its radar cross-section, RCS, is significantly larger than modern U.S. stealth drones, but its operational altitude and the sheer number of units deployed pose a significant challenge to U.S. freedom of navigation. The drones are equipped with electro-optical sensors and synthetic aperture radars, SAR, allowing continuous monitoring of the entire Venezuelan coast and vital maritime routes in the Caribbean, including the Panama Canal. The intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance ISR capability of these drones is the real asset, enabling Venezuela and China to track U.S. fleet movements in real time. Although officially for surveillance, the Wing-Lung 2 can carry up to 480 kilos of payload, including up to 12 air-to-ground missiles or guided bombs. The mere capability to attack forces U.S. military planners to treat them as a frontline threat. The presence of Chinese-origin anti-ship missiles, such as the C-704, which can be adapted to these drones, is the Pentagon's main concern. The drones are being integrated into the Venezuelan air defense system, which includes Russian and Chinese-origin radars. This integration creates a layered defense network that is significantly harder to penetrate. The coordination between the drones and the S-300 surface-to-air missile systems, Russian, creates an A2AD bubble that extends for hundreds of kilometers into the Caribbean. This A2AD zone is designed to deny the U.S. Navy and Air Force the ability to operate freely within a critical range of the Venezuelan coast, effectively pushing the U.S. operational envelope further out into the Atlantic. The operating base at El Libertador has been rapidly modernized with Chinese technical support, including reinforced hangars and dedicated satellite communication infrastructure, ensuring the drones can operate 24/7. Furthermore, China provided a mobile command and control center, C2, allowing drone operations to be decentralized and harder to neutralize by a precision strike. The logistics of the transfer. The drones were not delivered by air, but by sea, in Chinese cargo ships disguised as infrastructure equipment transport. The logistical operation, which involved route deviations and temporary deactivation of transponders, demonstrates the level of coordination and Beijing's desire to keep the operation as discreet as possible until activation. The arrival of the drones was first reported by an unofficial intelligence source, who noted the presence of large transport crates and the arrival of specialized Chinese technicians at the airbase. The U.S. response was immediate, but cautious. The repositioning of the USS Harry S. Truman, CVN-75, and its strike group, including the cruiser USS Normandy, CG-60, and the destroyers USS Farragut, DDG-99, and USS Forrest Sherman, DDG-98, is a demonstration of naval power. For the first time in decades, U.S. air superiority in the Caribbean is contested by a high-tech unmanned asset. Any U.S. surveillance aircraft, such as the P-8 Poseidon, now must operate under the threat of being tracked and potentially engaged. The main concern is the risk of misidentification and the potential for a miscalculation leading to a direct confrontation. The presence of Chinese drones complicates the intervention scenario. An attack on the drones would be an attack on a Chinese military asset, even if operated by Venezuelans, raising the risk of escalation to unacceptable levels. The Pentagon is now in a lose-lose situation. Not responding validates Chinese aggression. Responding risks an all-out war. If you value analysis that uncovers the truth behind the headlines, this is the time to click the subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next in this crisis. President Nicolás Maduro, in a televised speech, hailed the arrival of the drones as a milestone in the defense of national sovereignty and a legitimate response to the imperialist threat. Defense narrative. Venezuela frames the acquisition as purely defensive, aimed at protecting its borders and critical infrastructure, such as refineries and pipelines, against acts of terrorism and sabotage, a clear reference to secret U.S. operations or sanctions. Maduro's speech emphasizes the inalienable right of a sovereign nation to defend itself against economic and military coercion. Chinese support as a shield. Beijing's support serves as a political and military shield. China, by providing the technology, signals that it considers Venezuela a strategic partner whose stability is vital to its own economic and geopolitical interests. The Chinese presence acts as a deterrent factor against any U.S.-backed regime change plan. China's move is not an act of charity. It is a multifaceted strategic move aimed at undermining U.S. hegemony and testing its response capabilities. Beijing is testing the resolve of the U.S. by establishing a high-tech military presence in the American backyard. China forces Washington to divert resources and attention from the Indo-Pacific, the primary theater of operations for Chinese containment. The crisis in the Caribbean is a low-cost strategic distraction for China. China is one of Venezuela's largest creditors and has massive investments in infrastructure and energy in the country. The stability of the Maduro regime is crucial to ensuring the repayment of these loans and the security of its assets. The drones are in essence an insurance policy for Chinese investments, ensuring that Venezuela can continue to supply oil and other resources. The transfer of advanced military technology to a country in the Western Hemisphere is a clear signal that China is willing and able to project power and influence globally, challenging the notion of exclusive spheres of influence. This is the first time China has established a long-range offensive military capability in the Western Hemisphere, a geopolitical milestone. China is exploiting the U.S. drone dilemma. Winglong 2 drones are relatively cheap to operate and replace, estimated at $1 to $2 million per unit. In contrast, the U.S. would have to use high-cost F/A-18 fighters, use $70 million per unit, or expensive air defense missiles, millions per missile, to neutralize them. China is forcing the U.S. to spend heavily to combat a low-cost threat. a classic case of asymmetric warfare. China can use the drones to collect intelligence data on the tactics, communication frequencies, and electronic signatures of U.S. ships and aircraft, turning the Caribbean into a real-time electronic warfare laboratory. This data collection is invaluable for Beijing's future military planning. If this analysis made you think, show your support. Leave a like and share this video with a friend who needs to understand the gravity of this crisis. This helps us bring this critical information to more people. The Chinese drone crisis has immediate and profound consequences for regional and global security. Countries like Colombia and Brazil, U.S. allies, are expressing concern about the militarization of Venezuelan airspace. The presence of long-range Chinese attack drones on the borders of Colombia and Brazil is seen as a direct threat to their national security, forcing them to reevaluate their defense strategies and seek security guarantees from the U.S. Impact on Caribbean islands. The Caribbean islands, many of which are close U.S. allies, such as Curaçao, Aruba, and Puerto Rico, are now under the shadow of a long-range surveillance and attack capability. The presence of Chinese drones directly threatens the security of tourism and the economic stability of these islands, forcing them to reconsider their stance of neutrality or alignment. Impact on maritime trade. Increased militarization and the presence of long-range surveillance assets raise insurance costs and risk for maritime trade in the Caribbean, a vital route for global commerce. Shipping companies are now reconsidering their routes, which could lead to an increase in consumer prices. The end of the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, which for 200 years defined the Western Hemisphere as the exclusive sphere of influence of the U.S., is now under direct attack. China, by establishing a high-tech military presence, signals that the doctrine is obsolete. The U.S. failure to prevent this technology transfer is seen globally as a sign of weakness and an erosion of American authority. The historical context of the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, proclaimed in 1823, was the first major landmark of U.S. foreign policy, establishing Latin America as a region outside European colonization. Historically, the U.S. used the doctrine to justify military and political interventions, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis. China, by installing a long-range military capability, is essentially rewriting the Great Game in the Western Hemisphere, forcing the U.S. to confront a power challenge it has not seen since the Cold War. The implication is that China is signaling that the America for the Americans of 1823 has been replaced by the America for the multipolar world of today. The doctrine, once a shield against European monarchies, is now a relic facing a challenge from a global economic and military superpower, marking a definitive shift in the global balance of power. China's long-term strategy. China is not just selling drones, it is buying influence. The transfer of advanced military technology is part of a long-term strategy to create a network of security partners that depend on Chinese technology. This ensures that, in the future, any U.S. military action in the region will have to take into account the possibility of facing Chinese weapons systems, increasing the cost and risk of intervention. China is building a sphere of deterrence in the Western Hemisphere. The immediate geopolitical impact. The Chinese drone crisis has an immediate impact on global geopolitics. China is demonstrating that its ability to project power is not limited to the South China Sea. This move is a strategic masterstroke that forces the U.S. to divide its resources and reevaluate its global containment strategy. The world is watching whether the U.S. will allow China to establish a military precedent in its own hemisphere. The narrative war. China and Venezuela are winning the narrative war, framing the drone transfer as an act of South-South cooperation and defense against unilateral aggression by the U.S. The U.S., on the other hand, is stuck in a narrative of threat to regional security that resonates poorly with Latin American countries, which view the Monroe Doctrine with historical skepticism. China is using its global propaganda machine to amplify this narrative, undermining the legitimacy of the U.S. response. The Russia factor. Although the focus is China, Venezuela, U.S., Russia is not absent. Russia has a long-standing military cooperation agreement with Venezuela and is the main supplier of air defense systems, such as the S-300. China is leveraging existing Russian infrastructure to integrate its drones, creating a military technology alliance that is more than the sum of its parts. Russia quietly supports China, as any U.S. distraction in the Caribbean relieves pressure on Ukraine and the Black Sea. The U.S. credibility crisis. The greatest damage to the U.S. is not military, but one of credibility. The inability to prevent the transfer of advanced military technology to a sanctioned regime in its own hemisphere is a sign that U.S. hegemony is in decline. This could lead to a global reevaluation of alliances and a realignment of power in favor of the multipolar bloc. The reaction of the OAS and the UN, the Organization of American States, OAS, traditionally aligned with the U.S., is divided. While some members condemn the drone transfer, others, led by Caribbean and Central American nations, call for moderation and criticize U.S. sanctions policy as the root cause of the crisis. In the UN Security Council, China and Russia use their veto power to block any resolution condemning the drone transfer, paralyzing the international response and validating Beijing's action. What would you do? Given the threat of Chinese drones, what would be the next tactical move for the U.S. to defuse this crisis without risking a direct confrontation with China? Leave your tactical suggestion in the comments. The presence of the drones creates new and dangerous escalation scenarios. Scenario 1. The surveillance incident and the kinetic response. A Wing-Lung 2 drone operating near the maritime border tracks and illuminates a U.S. warship with its radar. The U.S. ship, interpreting this as a hostile act, fires an air defense missile such as a RIM-162 ESSM to shoot down the drone. The drone is destroyed. China and Venezuela condemn the act as unprovoked aggression, and China demands immediate compensation and a formal apology, raising the crisis to a high-risk diplomatic level. The Pentagon must then justify using a $1 million missile to shoot down a $1 million drone. Scenario 2. The contested humanitarian intervention and the public relations victory. The U.S. attempts an aerial humanitarian intervention over Venezuela, using C-17 transport aircraft. The Chinese drones operated by Venezuelan personnel are used to block the airspace, forcing the U.S. aircraft to abort the mission. The use of drones to deny air access is a public relations victory for Venezuela and a strategic setback for the U.S., which is forced to retreat from an aid mission. Scenario 3. The cyber attack and mutual blindness. The U.S. launches a highly sophisticated cyber attack to disable the drone control system. China, in retaliation, launches a massive cyber attack against U.S. communication infrastructure in the Caribbean, targeting bases like Guantanamo and the communication satellite network. The war moves to the cyber domain, with unpredictable consequences for regional stability and U.S. command and control capability. Scenario 4. The diplomatic response and the tactical retreat with concessions. The U.S., recognizing the risk of escalation, opts for a tactical retreat. Instead of confronting the drones, the U.S. intensifies sanctions and diplomatic pressure on China and Venezuela, but accepts the new reality that air superiority in the Caribbean is no longer guaranteed. In a strategic move, the U.S. offers limited sanctions relief in exchange for an agreement on non-proliferation of attack drones in the region, a de facto recognition of the new Chinese sphere of influence. The Chinese drone crisis is the final test for the Monroe Doctrine, which for 200 years defined U.S. foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine, established in 1823, declared that any intervention by European powers in the Americas would be seen as a hostile act. For 2 centuries, it served as the cornerstone of U.S. hegemony. The presence of long-range Chinese attack drones is the first serious technological violation of this doctrine. China's success in establishing this military capability in Venezuela sends an unequivocal signal to the world. China can project military power anywhere, and the U.S. can no longer guarantee the security of its own hemisphere. This will encourage other Chinese and Russian allies to challenge the U.S.-led order in their respective regions. The crisis in the Caribbean is a microcosm of the transition to a multipolar world. China is using Venezuela as a foothold to redefine the rules of the global game, where influence is no longer dictated solely by military force, but by the ability to provide technology and political support without the conditions imposed by the West. Beijing's drone diplomacy is a new form of Cold War, where technology and economics replace direct confrontation. The transfer of Chinese drones to Venezuela is more than just breaking news. It is a geopolitical watershed. China has shown that it is willing to use its military technology to challenge U.S. hegemony in its own hemisphere. The Caribbean is no longer a backyard. It is the new center of the world, where the rules of the 21st century are being written. The crisis is no longer about Venezuela. It is about the future of U.S. global authority. The presence of Chinese drones in the Caribbean is a test of resolve that Washington cannot ignore. If China succeeds in establishing a permanent air defense base and breaking the blockade, the Monroe Doctrine will be dead, and the multipolar world will have won. The big question is, does the United States have the strategy to combat Chinese technology without risking an all-out war? The decision is yours. We want to know your opinion. Which of the 4 escalation scenarios do you believe is the most likely? And more importantly, if you were the commander-in-chief, what would be your next tactical move to defuse this crisis without losing credibility? Leave your sharpest analysis in the comments. Share this video so more people understand the danger, and subscribe to follow the unfolding of this crisis in real time. The future of global stability depends on your voice. Click here to see our previous analysis on the Iran-Venezuela crisis and understand how China seized the opportunity.